Hey guys, and welcome to the Fixed Limit Coaching for Advanced members. This is That's my name, and I hope you're all doing very well today. Now, today I'd like to pick up something that was brought up last week, and there were some really interesting points that were talked about, and the topic here is big blind defense. So, this information is specifically designed for microstakes players and low stakes players. And basically, if you want to increase your profits, one thing that you will need to learn is a comprehensive strategy for defending your big blind. So today, we will examine an exploitative strategy and why this is so important at the lower stakes. This allows us to justify pre-flop adjustments, and several factors must be considered. First of all, we'll look at the concept of required equity and the factors which determine its value, like our skill level and that of our opponents, the role that position plays, and also the rake. And second, we'll turn to estimated equity, where we look at range analysis and playability. Now, it's a simple point to remember that when our opponent open raises a small number of strong hands, we need to continue less often. And when they are raising a wide range of hands, we will continue more often. Simple enough, right? Adjusting to your opponents is an exploitative strategy. So we adopt an exploitative strategy when our opponents make large pre-flop mistakes by either not raising enough, or raising too much, or raising with weak or trash hands while limping their strong ones. And these types of mistakes are most common at the lower stakes. So if our opponent were playing a perfect pre-flop game, then we should adopt an unexploitable strategy against his raise, but in both cases, we're effectively doing the same thing. We're following the same steps for big blind defense. So first we need to determine the minimum equity required to continue against their raise. Second, we have to estimate our equity against their open raising range so we can decide whether or not to continue. And let's just discuss each one in turn here. So when we're considering our required equity to call, the first thing that we probably want to do is have an idea about our opponent's skill level and also our own skill level. Typically, against a tough aggressive player or someone who's as good as we are, right, we want to continue by calling with 35% equity or more. Now, the math which allows us to arrive at this number considers our average investment and the money that is contributed by the blinds. These calculations can be found in the Gold article on Preflop Play. So if you have Gold status, you'll be able to check that out. But if not, you can kind of abide by these simple rules that I'll lay out here today. So we've got this 35%. And what we often know is that rather than always being up against strong players, oftentimes the player on our immediate right is less skilled than we are. You know, if we're using strong seat selection, then we'll be able to continue with less equity because we have an advantage against weak opponents. And 33% required equity is enough to continue. Now, at first glance, this 2% difference between 35 and 33% may not seem like a lot, but the total difference is actually 4%. This is 2% less equity for us and 2% more equity for our opponents. So in other words, what this assumes is that against weak opponents, we have a 4% equity edge. Now, clearly, this is going to change depending on our opponent, right? And we could debate edges if we want, but 4% equity is a reasonable estimation. Now, if our opponent is unknown to us, if he seems very aggressive, or if he could be a maniac, this often means that our average investment goes up for the hand. And in this case, you should again use 35% equity to continue as kind of a baseline rate. Now, when we develop an understanding of our opponents, we can exploit their weaknesses, our edge increases, and this allows us to continue with slightly less equity, continue slightly more often. So there's other factors, right? Position. A positional advantage is significant, and we can actually measure this. After mining my own database, I can tell you that by looking at roughly 2 million hands that I've collected on regular opponents, just through regular play, I looked at the average difference in win rate by position for those players. And the average difference in win rate is roughly 4 big bets per 100 hands. So in other words, on average, a thinking player wins 4 big bets per 100 more in the big blind than they win in the small blind. 4 big bets per 100 more in early position than in the big blind, in middle position than in early position, and so on, right? It's not exactly that, but this is a good rough figure. Also, the rake is pretty significant, especially at the micro stakes, and gradually less so as you move up, right? So at 50 cent a dollar and below, the rake is roughly 4 big bets per 100 hands at 6 max. Depending on your playing style, it will change slightly, but this is again a good rough figure for us to start with. And what we can see is that the cost of the rake and the position are effectively the same, right? So even though we have position on the small blind when they open raise, and position gives us that roughly 4 big bet advantage, at the micro stakes, paying 4 big bets per 100 in rake effectively cancels this out. And what this means is that, you know, we should not be playing more because of our position necessarily, because the rake is kind of sucking that advantage away from us. Now, it's interesting to notice that a 4% skill edge produces a 2% equity difference pre-flop, and a 4.5% rake with a cap, which is what is the rake percentage at the micros. This produces approximately the 4 big bets per 100 rake paid. This reinforces two important concepts. Now, the first one is that in fixed limit, edges are small, but in the long run, these small edges represent a significant difference, right? The second is that knowing our opponent and being able to estimate our equity accurately is a tremendous advantage pre-flop, right? And this is, of course, post-flop as well. So from here, we can carry on and look at estimated equity. Now, accurately estimating your equity takes a lot of practice. If you repeat the process again and again, you can learn the skill. So while charts are one shortcut, they're only going to help you along so far. If you practice a lot, then you can develop an ability to accurately guess your equity, and the margin of error on your guesses is going to be small, and this will depend on how much you practice. If you use a program like Equilab, which is provided by Poker Strategy, Equilab, it's really great for this purpose. Basically, what you can do is simply insert your opponent's perceived hand range, and you can calculate the equity of various hands against it, right? And just by practicing and memorizing your equity against various hand ranges, you can get a good feel for it. And perhaps in another podcast and another coaching, I can talk a lot more about that. Now, playability, some hands perform better than their equity implies. Others perform worse. And the reason is because the hand is not over pre-flop, right? A hand is said to have strong playability when the correct way of playing the hand is frequently the same as the optimal way of playing the hand. In other words, this is the way that we would play our hand if we could actually see our opponent's hole cards. Now, when we have a hand that has strong playability, we are less likely to make mistakes. So if you hold a hand like 8-7 offsuit or 6-5 suited or other similar hands, right? And if you estimate that those hands have 34% equity, you should still play these hands even against a tough opponent, right? Even where your required equity is 35%, you can still play these hands, and the reason is because they have strong playability. So just as a quick summary, when we're applying an unexploitable big blind defense strategy 100% of the time, we're going to lose money in the micro stakes, right? Most players at the micro stakes do not raise with an optimal hand range, and therefore we should often adjust our play. Now, adjusting our play technically makes us exploitable, but it allows us to exploit our opponents when they are making large mistakes pre-flop. So by calculating our required equity and our estimated equity, you can justify a pre-flop call fold decision and adapt your play to maximize your profit when your opponent makes large mistakes. And at this point, what I can do is I can answer questions from the chat. If you have any comments, feel free to share them and we can generate some discussion. Also, I'm going to fire up some tables and we will get involved with some hands here. And as big blind defense situations come up, we can, of course, look at these steps and see how they work in practice. Okay. Oh, I guess I don't need Table Ninja. Close that up for the session today. Now, Fermina asks, what hands have the best playability? Some of the best examples of hands that are very playable, and Rant Rave has pointed them out. Yeah, hands like 8-9 suited, 10-9 suited, Queen Jack suited is another one. Hands that are well connected, right? Hands that we have a really good idea of where we are in the hand post flop. Other hands have good playability as well. Where we have a pretty good idea, but they don't always give us more equity than pre-flop implies. So here I'm faced with an open raise. I don't know this player, so I can assume he's open raising perhaps 50%. Against that hand range, I expect to have around 42% equity, and I can definitely call. I flopped an open ender, so I'll raise and semi-bluff with my jack high hand. And I'll just look for a second table here, and then I'll be able to take a closer look at some of those questions. Again, I do advocate that you guys use good table selection, good seat selection. This is close, but I'm going to fold until I get a better idea of what my opponent's up to. That's a hand I would often raise pre-flop for sure, especially against a button raise. Okay. 6-7 offsuit, standard fold pre-flop. Okay, so we've got a question here from Ziz, and he's asking, which hands would you defend on the big blind against a 20% open raising range if your opponent has 67% went to showdown? Well, in that case, we should probably adjust our hand range to just value hands, right? So if we're thinking about how often our opponent is showing down, and if it's very often, that usually implies that fold equity is not going to play a big role in our strategy, right? So we're not going to be able to get him to fold large parts of his hand range. So against a 20% hand range, there's actually a relatively straightforward way of answering that question. We could just open up Equilator, and I'll just load it up here. Having so many things open a second ago might be a bit taxing on my computer, so I am trying to be aware of that. So all we do is put in 20%, right? And if we open this up, we can see what that hand range looks like. We might make a few changes, take out some of the weaker hands in there. Something like that, right? Smaller changes aren't going to make a huge difference. And we can use the hand range calculator and literally just put in 35%. And when we calculate that, it will bring up this hand range with greater than 35%. And I'll open raise here, probably check fold here. It's close though because I've got all those backdoors. But he's checked back, which is okay. And I'll check fold turn. So when we open this hand range, what we see is a lot of suited connectors and stuff like that. Some other hands might actually be good as well. I'm going to barrel this turn. It's close though. If he has like random overcards, he probably folds here. And he raises, so I'll fold against the raise. It is difficult for me to pay attention to the table and explain all this stuff at the same time, but I will do the best I can. And so some of these hands, right, have 20% equity, but they're not very playable, like ace deuce and ace three, right? These are weak ace high hands. If we improve, we don't really know where we are all of the time, right? So we can fold some of those hands, but other hands like 10-9, 9-8, right? These hands have higher playability. So if they have just slightly less than 35%, we can defend those. And this is the kind of hand range that we might want to defend against a 20% hand range. So I've 3-bet this guy's open raise. He seems to be raising quite a bit, so we'll adapt our strategy a bit there. And he's check called the flop. No, when this guy check calls, I think he either has a weak made hand, sometimes weaker hands that he'll just check fold the turn. So I'm going to check back and call the river, seeing this guy as being pretty aggressive, and maybe I'll be able to induce some bluffs as we saw here. 9-8 or 8-9, 8-7 offsuit. I'll fold there. Standard fold pre-flop. Okay, you said the rake on the micros are high, but do you think we can start playing 6 max from the beginning, like at 5 cent, 10 cent? Hey, Rento. That's kind of an interesting question. When I started playing 6 max, I started at 10 cent, 20 cent, and the rake is significant. So this guy just open raised 9-4. I should pay some close attention to what he's raising because I can see now that he's getting quite a bit out of line. He's led the flop. I'm going to call flop raise turn. This turn card I'll just call because I think he may decide to fold some weak made hands. I'm not sure. And I'll just call down here now. King deuce offsuit, I'll fold pre-flop. So yeah, on stars at the micro stakes, playing 6 max, it's probably going to be fine, but I would just recommend that you use good table selection, and really work on your game. As long as you have a significant edge over your opponents, you're going to be able to make up for the price of the rake. Queen, slightly bad turn card here. If he has some really weak hands, like maybe ace high, he might decide to fold. 10-9 offsuit. This guy seems to be open raising almost everything. So I'm going to 3-bet. Basically, I need 43% equity against his hand range to isolate 3-bet. And given that he's open raising such a wide hand range, I expect to have that. 7-6. Actually, this table's not very good, so I'm going to get off of it. Playing short-handed, the rake is going to be higher, sometimes significantly higher. When Byron Jacobs and I played our heads-up match at 50 cent a dollar, the rake was like $20 per 100 hands for the two of us. And I think what that roughly breaks down to is like 8 big bets per 100 hands or something. I don't know. It's some outrageous number. Actually, I don't think that the way I've put that makes sense, but I can't exactly remember how that all works out. So, yeah. Ace King offsuit, standard raise. And again, I'm looking for tables. I'll sit here. Maybe we can fill in these other 2 seats. I think these guys are both weak. Yeah. So that's good for us. King 8, this is close. If this guy behind me were tighter, I would consider open raising that. Okay. As far as, which poker rooms to play at, Rentano, I really enjoy playing at PokerStars because they do have great software, as Avataran pointed out. And, they do have a lot of game selection. There's tables open all the time. So that's my preference. But, anywhere that you can find good tables, then that's going to be worth it. Okay. Here with 10-8 offsuit, I'm going to over limp. Now, there are situations where I would consider actually raising with this hand in order to isolate the early position limper, but when the big blind is also loose and passive and, inclined to make big mistakes, we don't have the same incentive to isolate the early position player because what are we isolating against, right? We're not trying to push out the other loose, opponent who's going to be making mistakes. We may as well keep him in. So there's not as many reasons to raise against our equity. So I've raised pre-flop, second pair, bet it for value. This guy's limping hand range is actually going to be kind of similar to this sort of hand. He's going to be limping in suited connectors, stuff like that. So we're playing this hand for fold equity. His went to showdown is only 36%. So basically, I'm raising here with the intention of trying to, induce folds and stuff like that. This turn card is quite bad. When he plays check call turn, I'm actually going to check back this queen on the river. I don't think he has too many hands to pay us off with. It's quite close though, but I think that 10 and queen hit a lot of his hands. And again, he's not showing down all that often, so we need to be wary of value betting too lightly against him. Okay. That looks like it might be a fine option later. And I'm on several different wait lists now. Okay, let me catch up with some of these questions. Rant Rave says, yes, you can start six-handed at 5 cent, 10 cent. That's good to hear. I'd imagine that you have some large sample size on whether or not that's profitable. And I expect it is. I've played a little bit there recently through the coachings. And I could say that it's probably profitable. Just keep working on your game and building up your bankroll. Avataran says, the only bad thing about stars is that it's hard for a microstakes player to get bonuses. Yeah, again, that's not something I focus on too much myself, but rakeback is important. Do I have a text where my stats are shown? Hey, Louis. I actually don't have a text breakdown of them, but if you go into the feedback thread, which is listed in the coaching info, you'll be able to see some of the stats that I list as being important as a basic strategy. Queen Jack, standard call here. This player is probably open raising about, 18% from that position, and I totally missed the board, so I'll play check fold there. Okay. Maybe I'll try table starting. Oh, that guy's sitting out. Fold there. Yeah, because most of these tables are all full right now, so maybe I can start a table up, and maybe that'll work out just fine. Avataran says, I've played over 55k hands on 5 cent, 10 cent, and so far so good. Excellent. Yeah, it's been a few years since I've been playing at those stakes regularly, so I can't speak to them very well, but I'm sure they're still profitable. Rent Rave says, 7-8 suited hand. Do you think you lost in value on the river? Loose passive players are quite often not folding worse pocket pairs, lower pocket pairs than yours, and also ace highs or good ace highs. I think that we had a thin value bet there against his hand range. It's thin. Sometimes he'll show a better hand. Most cases we'll win. Right. So the problem with this exact player is that he's not actually loose passive. He's kind of passive, but he's actually kind of tight, only playing 24% of hands. Also, his went to showdown is kind of tight. 37% is not all that high. My hand sample on him is not huge, so there's going to be some, issues there as well. But yeah, he's not actually the kind of player that's showing down ace high a whole lot there. And for that reason, I am happy to just check back when my, when my hand against this calling range doesn't really have an equity edge. 5-8 suited, enough to defend against a button open raise. I flopped a gut shot, and I'm going to check raise with it. We can actually represent clubs, so we've got some fold equity. And he calls, and I'm actually going to check the river, not barrel bluffing on that river card. And he bets, so we'll fold. Uh, 9-8, standard open raise. If I actually hit a pair, I would bet it because he could pay off with lower pairs. Also, if he has king high, he might decide to call down as well. 9-8 offsuit, not quite enough to peel here. If we had a backdoor straight draw, then it's closer. I mean, we kind of do with the queen, but we need, 10 jack to come runner runner, which only gives us like a 0.25 increase in our outs. Very thin. And I'm on a bunch of tables all of a sudden. So let's just pop those over. And actually, we won't need that one, so I'll leave it. Pocket fours on this board, enough to bet, it's close. What sample do I have? Right, so the first stat up here is VPIP, then pre-flop raise, then 3-bet, then hands. So I've got, roughly 100 hands on this player. Raise on the turn here. I'm usually going to have stronger hands when I bet here, so I'm just going to fold my fours. I've got 80 hands on this player. He's relatively passive overall. So I'm going to assume that he's usually got something relatively strong there when he raises me. Ten-7 suited, standard blind defense there. Again, we could think about possibly isolating our opponent here, but we don't really need to push this guy out of the pot because he's making a lot of mistakes too. And we don't really have an equity advantage against his limping range. Three seven standard fold. This player, when I talked about in the presentation which some of you may have missed, but it'll be in the video, about when I was saying about players who are raising non-standard hands, this Pinjo guy is the kind of player that I had in mind. We saw him earlier. He raised the button with 9-4 offsuit, right? So when he raises from the small blind, it's going to be a similar story. And basically, any hand that we stove as having, 35% equity against a typical top-down hand range of whatever his percentage is, we're actually going to be better off because he has all these non-standard hands, like, just trash hands. And that helps us out a lot. Sometimes that means that we can adjust our strategy and defend more loosely, but oftentimes we can just kind of stick with our normal strategy and it just becomes more profitable because of those mistakes. So there's two ways we can look at it. Rentano asks, how many tables do I usually play? When I'm not coaching, it depends. Sometimes I'll play 2, sometimes I'll play 4 tables. It varies quite a lot. And sometimes I'll just play 1 table. If I've been working on something in my game where, I'm just going to check back here. I don't think I can get him to fold ace high. If I've been working on something in my game, then sometimes I'll just want to focus on that. So I've defended against this guy. We saw him lead out on the flop. Donk bet earlier with a draw, so we know he can be aggressive with draws. I'm just going to call down with my flopped bottom pair here, expecting to be ahead often enough against hands like 6-7, 9-7, trash hands as well, lower pocket pairs, lots and lots of stuff. As we see here, he had 5-4 offsuit. If we raise the flop, well, we probably wouldn't raise with bottom pair, but there's lots of reasons for us to take a bluff catching line against a player who's as aggressive as this guy with, a wide range of hands. So this guy's limp 3-bet. I have ace jack and I'll just call. this is somewhat polarizing. He can have some big hands and some weak hands. I've flopped double gutters, so I'm going to raise here. Sometimes we can use this as a free card. We do have showdown value, but I don't think it's often enough for me to showdown very often. He's 3-bet us, so it could be ace queen, king queen as well. Even ace king sometimes does this. And we got there on the river, which is good for me. I don't think he has jacks very often, so I'm going to raise. And flush draw is possible, but not that likely. Again, there's just a few combinations. And I'll take a note that he open limp 3-bet, queen jack offsuit. But for you guys, and I was saying this already, when you're learning, if you play a lot of tables, then the quality of your learning is deficient, right? So, a lot of people will say, well, how many hands should I play before I know if I'm an experienced player or not? And obviously that's going to vary a lot, but the quality of your play when you're playing is really the biggest factor. So I've raised this guy's donk bet with the nut flush draw, and then I checked back the flop. I've rivered a 5. Now, I don't think I have a value bet, even though he can have a 2, because I think he might play this way with a 9, a 7, even at some hands with a 10 in it. So I'm just going to check back and hope to be ahead. And he donked with air, which is worth noting. We've been 3-bet pre-flop, king queen versus a check. I'm going to check back and take my free card. And I'm getting 4-1 on the turn. This guy 3-bet us with queen jack earlier. So we have implied odds of probably one big bet if he has ace high. We know he can have some loose hands. So this is quite close. I'm going to say that I probably have 4 outs and would need closer to 10-1. I'm getting 4-1, so I'm going to fold there. What happened here? Did I raise and he called? Oh, I think I made a mistake. I thought he 3-bet me, and I'm just going to check fold the flop now, but ordinarily I would have continuation bet there. Just misreading the action there, I guess. Avatarin says, no, he didn't dunk with air. He had a gut shot, backdoor gut shot. Yeah, that's true. And I'm sure you're joking a little bit there, but it's we're always going to have a bit of something on the flop. So I've raised pre-flop here. We've been called by the big blind. Pretty draw heavy board, so I'm going to barrel the turn and take a free showdown. We've been check raised though, so again this is pretty strong, and I'll play bet fold. If we come to find out that this player is check raising a lot of turns, then we'll have to adjust our strategy. Just slightly. Sometimes we can think about checking back the turn to induce bets on the river. This player on the button is not that aggressive, so I'm just going to lead right out with my top pair. I know he's been stabbing a little bit, and so against that kind of player, we can start to think that he might stab the flop in this case too. But I'll just lead right out. We've been raised on the turn. I've got a good strong draw to go with my hand. He could have 2 pair at this point, or some kind of top pair, maybe even a straight. But now that I've got my flush, I'll check raise for value. And on the flop here, with the lead into the pre-flop aggressor, I like to raise here. Sometimes we can use this to get this player to fold hands that actually beat us, hands like ace-9 offsuit, which can give us a pair of 9s that can sometimes be good. On this 7 turn, though, I'm going to check 3 ways. When he checks here, or when he bets here, he could just have like weak showdown hands, hands like ace-high, and unfortunately, we're probably not going to be able to bluff those hands. He's bet the river. This could still be lots of pocket pairs, so I'll play check fold. Ace high here, I'll check raise. He can have lots of gut shots, lots of pairs that are worse than ours. And he's 3-bet us, so I'll call. The turn counterfeits our kicker, but it counterfeits some of his as well. Really just ace-9. we do have a bit more equity. Sometimes the river card can improve our hand even more. King Jack, I've isolate 3-bet the button. And we've been called. I'll value bet the turn with my second pair. And on the river, I'm going to bet, and I think we have to pay off against a raise, only because I don't know this player. When I bet the river, if I'm folding with 2-pair, I think it's going to be too often, but it's possible that's wrong. It's just something we need to be cautious of. Also, as we see here, he called down 3rd pair on a 4 straight, which, as you can imagine, is very profitable for us. I'm going to isolate 3-bet this player now. I can kind of guess that he's on a bit of tilt. He might just decide to play a bit more foldy now. Also, the players behind are very tight, and they're going to make mistakes and fold some hands they shouldn't. This is loose aggressive strategy. It's very situational, and we don't want to get too far out of line with these kinds of hands, these kinds of things. Queen 4 suited. Looks like I missed something in the action that everybody else is picking up on. Let me see if I can find it. What often happens is that I quickly get wrapped up with action at other tables. Okay, yeah, so he called flop raise turn with top pair. Bet called the river. This could be something that, like, he might just see us as being very aggressive. So Brownie Spy has 3-bet me, and I'm going to call. I flopped some good backdoor draws here and overcards, so I can easily call. Let me see if I have some specific notes. No, I'm just going to fold the turn there. 4-1. We didn't improve to any of our draws. It's possible that he is barreling the turn with ace high. In fact, I think it's pretty likely, but I don't know for sure if, say I decide to raise him on the turn and barrel the river. Some players are still showing down quite loosely against those raises. Kind of an interesting spot here. I have a bit of showdown value with king high. I don't think that he's going to fold very many hands if I check raise him. In other words, hands that are better than mine. So I'm going to check call. And I'll check call the turn as well. And the river bricks off. Basically, when he bets here, it's kind of polarizing. He can value bet any, kind of pocket pair like 5s or better. He can also, bluff with hands like 8-7. We have an 8 though, so it's not very likely. If I had ace high here, I would pay off. The reason I like folding here is in part because his value hand range is going to be very wide. This is a great river card. If he has top pair, he is pretty likely to raise with it. That could also be 2-pair, right? I don't know this guy is going to fold there, but I'll 3-bet here with my straight now. We have the nuts. Second nuts, thank you, Queen Jack. Oh, hey, Sven. So we've got another open raise from the cutoff. This guy does seem to be fairly aggressive. We're still not quite sure, though. I haven't seen him showing up with any non-standard hands yet. This player here, though, has shown up with a lot of non-standard hands. 8-7 suited, I would probably isolate 3-bet here. For those who don't know Sven BE, he's the content manager for the English and German communities. So we've 3-bet this loose aggressive player with 8-7 suited. We've been led into on the flop, and we have some weak backdoors here. We're getting about 9-1. It's possible that actually bluff raising here is going to be profitable. He might just decide to fold with weak trash hands that he was trying to bluff with. And as we saw here, that's what happened. These two blinds are folding very often. this big blind is folding 60% of the time, and so I'm inclined to open up my button raising range a little bit against him. Normally I would open raise about king 6 offsuit as a standard hand at these stakes. You might even want to bump that up to king 8 if you're working with a certain level of experience, right? If you're still learning. So I've flopped top pair and I've been check raised. He could have queen 10 when he does this. He could have flush draws as well. And I'm literally just going to call down against him. On the river, I actually don't have a hand that can pay off. So I'm going to check back. It's very unlikely that I'm going to win here. Five nine offsuit, standard fold. I've been 3-bet with eights. Against kind of tag players, I tend to just flat 100%. Good flop for us. We flopped second set. Jack 9 suited, I'll open raise as well. With these two tight guys behind us, I'm prepared to open raise some weaker aces, but ace 5 is a little bit too weak. Ace 2 suited I would raise. Ace 7 offsuit plus I would raise as well. This is very interesting. I have 500 hands on this player, and that's the first time he's ever folded to a flop check raise. I can see now that he hasn't been check raised very often on the flop, so that's going to be a pretty big factor. When all of a sudden it jumps up to 80%, then it's pretty likely that he hasn't been check raised very often. King Queen standard raise from early position, and again against this Vovas guy, he seems to be raising a lot, so I'm isolate 3-betting him quite a bit as well. It's a similar spot to on the upper right table against Pinjov, where he's just raising a whole lot. So we've been capped and I flopped top pair. Here I can kind of play way ahead, way behind. It seems like this player is very aggressive, so if he has trash hands, we can just let him barrel off with those. We've improved in a way to a very weak flush draw on the turn. Now his hands have a lot of redraws. If he has like a queen high flush draw or whatever, then he can have the best hand with that. Another problem with this jack on the turn, though, is that if he has a hand like queen jack or king jack, he might just decide to check back the river after betting the turn. So his hand range for a bet on the river includes fewer hands that we actually beat because he's improved to some weak showdown value that he might decide to check with. We don't know for sure at this point. 6-4 offsuit. I don't know this player, so I'm definitely going to fold there. I would need him to be open raising very often to justify continuing with that hand. Sven BA says, no slow play with 8-8. No, I typically don't slow play at all. I just flat out of position and check raise 100% of flops. But it is worth talking about. Obviously, whenever we have a strong hand, we have the option to slow play it. Now, my thinking is that most of the time, players will perceive me as being very aggressive because I'm open raising a lot of pots. So, if he has a hand like 10s or 9s, even 7s, he's not going to fold the flop very often. It's only really going to be with hands like queen jack and, king queen, stuff like that, where he'll fold. And I think that that's not going to be so many hands. And, when I check call with those hands, he might just decide to check back the turn. In fact, I think that's going to be a fairly likely situation. So I've 3-bet this Pinjo guy again, and we've been 4-bet. Wow, that's a good flop for me. The short stack in this spot, we're pretty much obligated to see a showdown, but obviously I've flipped the nuts with a strong redraw, so I'll just put them all in, and we'll see how it plays out. So we've been let into on the flop here. He could have some weak hands. He's short stacked though, so we really have to continue on our outs. This is a tough spot. I'm going to call once. I'm getting 7-1 on the flop. The problem here is that he could have hands like ace deuce, ace 5, also hands like deuce 5, because he's really defending that often. So I need to evaluate whether or not my ace queen or my queen high here actually has showdown value. And it's a tough decision. Um, we're going to be getting 7-1 on the river. No, more than that, 8-1, I think. I'm going to fold there, but it's close, actually. Oh, why am I sitting out? I must have misclicked something there, and I'll rejoin that table in a minute. So I flop second pair. I'm going to check raise with it for value. Against the standard button hand range, we're going to have maybe 56, 57% equity. Obviously, he can have a lot of draws, some of which we'll want to 3-bet. So I'll call his raise. And he's bet the turn, so I'll play check call. On the river, some river cards we can check fold. The 2 isn't really one of them, so I'll just play check call river. Of course, you know, it's possible for him to have really strong hands, but there's so many draws and all of them have busted. A6 here, I'll fold against the donk bet. Basically, if we decided to fold a hand like second pair in that kind of situation, it would be an exploitative play, right? But we don't really know enough about our opponent to justify taking exploitative lines post-flop, so I'm happy to just show down my second pair there. So I've 3-bet with 6s. This guy's 4-bet. He's going to have a really strong hand range when he does that. Very draw-heavy board. This guy's going to c-bet basically 100% of the time without fail. So I'll check raise my set. When he 3-bets there, he can have some strong hands, and I think he's going to raise me again on the turn with those, especially like his overpairs. So I'll cap for value. Some draws got in, so some of those hands may decide to call now. And the 10 on the river is pretty blank. If he has 10s, then we're behind, but otherwise we're ahead and we'll win. What's going on here? Oh, I've just ran out of time. That's not good. Ace 3 suited. We can either limp or raise. With the blinds being as tight as they seem to be, I'm going to raise here. Basically, if I can push them out of the pot, then I can isolate players who are inclined to make the biggest mistakes. And I should have very close or slightly better than average equity against the 2 of them. So we've been led into on the flop here. I have top pair with some backdoor draws. This kind of board texture is pretty dry, so a lot of the hands that this player would fold to a raise, he's also going to fold to 1-bet. So I'm just going to call with the intention of mostly calling down. I flop 2 pair on the bottom left, so I'll bet out. And he's all in on the river, so we'll pay off with 2 pair. Jack 7. This is kind of a standard open raise. If you are not very experienced as a player, feel free to tighten that up to Jack 9 offsuit. Against a tough player, I'd usually fold Jack 6 offsuit, and you know, we could kind of adjust around that range as well. Sven BE says, what do you think about his 3-barrel top left with king 6 suited with basically no hand? Okay, and now this was earlier on, I think it was the, yeah, top left, thank you. And I'll just go back to that hand because it was interesting. King 6, I'll fold there. So let's take a look. I'll blow this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the situation here was I 3-bet his button open raise and he 4-bet me pre-flop. And then on the ace high board, he just barreled every street. Now, when I play check call flop, either I have a made hand or some kind of a decent draw. Here with ace 4, it's close. I can't really justify folding yet because I don't know this player well enough. So I check call the flop and I have that hand range. Now on the turn, some of those draws actually came in, especially the flush draws. So when he's barreling now, you know, he may think that if he bets the turn in the river, he might be able to get me to fold weak pocket pairs like 5s or 4s or something, or like something with a 4. especially on a heart river. So I don't so much mind the turn barrel because there are some turn cards he can represent, but it's still really thin. He's basically getting 3 to 1 to bet the turn in the river, right? Um, and that flush draw is only going to come in 20% of the time, where he would actually need 4 to 1, better than 4 to 1. So I think from his position, um, he should probably just give up on the turn. But let's say we had a slightly different turn card. Maybe we had, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to bet here on the turn, assuming that I still have some showdown value. He raises, and I've got a gut shot plus overcards. He could have a hand like King Queen here and raise, but I don't think that it's all that likely. He could also have a flush draw, so we're kind of left with a tough decision here on the river. Um, he's not representing all that much. He's representing. Can I value bet the river? I think I can bet here, but it's close. Uh, hmm. Wow, I'm folding here, but it's really interesting. I think I should pay off there with maybe like ace king, but not ace queen. And effectively, those are the same hand because we beat all the same stuff, but that allows me to call down with, you know, not such a high frequency. 5-7. This player's raising a lot, so we'll defend. Again, we probably need about 33% equity to justify continuing against this player. He's checked to us on the turn. Now, there's different ways we can play this. I think he's going to play check call a lot with gut shots and stuff, so I'll bet. We've been 3-bet by a tight player. I'm going to call and see a flop here in position. We flopped a gut shot with our pocket pair, and we also have backdoor diamonds, so I'll call. The 5 doesn't change anything, so I'll call again. He could easily double barrel with hands like ace-jack, especially ace-jack suited, and ace-king. Ace-king got there on the river, so if he decides to bet, then I'm just going to fold. Oh, did the sound cut out? Sorry about that, guys. Sometimes like I said before, I get caught up in the action. So I raised pre-flop for value against this guy's limping hand range. I'll bet the ace high board. Pocket 10, standard raise. We get raised on the flop. I don't really have much to continue with, so I'll just fold immediately. Pocket 10s against a 3-bet. When we have this player cold calling behind, I'm going to 4-bet, but if we were heads up, I'd just call. His hand range, actually some of it is kings, like king jack, especially king jack suited, if he doesn't like 3-betting it, if he's not comfortable with that. But he could also have like hands like Jack 10 suited, Queen Jack suited, and so on. Maybe some smaller pocket pairs. We get value from all that stuff. The king on the flop is pretty bad. We're getting a good price though at like 14 to 1 to try and improve. Our setouts should be pretty clean here. So bet call flop, and I'll play check fold on the turn. Ten-7 suited. If this player immediately behind me were tighter, then that would be the kind of hand I would open raise. 10-8 suited is kind of standard for me, although there are situations where I think folding is appropriate. But the button is very tight, so if we had another similar player, then we could expect them to make incorrect folds against our raise pretty often, and that would be enough to let us continue with the hand. Okay. So if you guys saw any hands that you want discussed, actually maybe we could go back and look at that pocket kings hand, because I think that Roman SP had some tough decisions there with pocket kings. Um, oh, that wasn't it. I had sixes. There it is. Okay, I raised pre-flop. This guy cold called. We've got top pair, top kicker, so we'll just bet for value. So let's think about this scenario. We've got an open raise from a loose opponent on the button. He's multi-tabling like crazy. I know he plays a lot of tables, right? You can just look at the lobby and you can see that this guy's playing probably 8 tables. I'm not sure how many, but it's a lot. So we've got this player on the button who's been open raising almost like a maniac. He might know that, but he may not realize that I've adjusted to that and that I'm now actually, 3-betting him light. Um, so he may actually think that I'm not going to have pocket sixes. Pocket sixes isn't particularly light, but for him, when he thinks of light raises, it's going to be a light raise for him. Jack 9 offsuit. This is close. The blinds are very tight, so I'll raise. We can bet call the flop here. He could easily have a draw like 5-6. Our king high has pretty decent showdown value here, and we have blockers against draws. I'm going to call again here. The ace on the river is actually really good because now he's much less likely to value bet an 8, as we saw here. So if he does bet the river, then we can be pretty sure that his hand range is more polarized. So he's not value betting weak 8s, right? He's not very likely to have a 7 because there's 2 on board. And all of those draws busted. So we could probably call down there with our king high. On the river here, I'm going to value bet. It's quite close. I don't think he ever has top pair. He could have a 9 with a better kicker. Oh, wow, he does have top pair. That's special. But I think he could still have hands like pocket 8s, and those are good hands for us too. And I'll call again here with my 7s. And he's bet the river. I'm going to pay off here, but it's close. Ace queen. Again, this guy's been so aggressive so far, and we do have a limited sample on him, that I don't feel justified in making exploitable folds against him. He could just be barreling off with ace jack or whatever. Again, we've been check raised on the turn, and I'll just fold there. Although I didn't really think very strongly about that turn bet. On that kind of a board texture, we might be inclined to weight his hand range towards made hands and might be able to justify a check back. But when he raises the turn, he's very strong, so I'm pretty happy with that decision. We've got trash here, so I'll play check fold. We've hit a pair, though, and there's a lot of draws now, so I'm actually going to value bet. And they just fold. In some ways, that bet on the turn is for protection as well. So ace-jack against this guy, I'm actually flooding 100% against him because I think it allows me to continue with a stronger hand range when I decide to make loose calls. And, I can disguise my hand range a little bit. If he has a hand like ace-10, ace-9, he might play bet call, flop, raise, turn, and he'll be far behind us. And this turn bet is pretty loose again. This guy's loose passive. We have a bit of showdown value plus a draw. We're getting 6-1. Wow, what's going on here? I think this guy's check raised me like 5 times in a row, and I'm just not paying attention, which I'm not very happy about. I actually find it very difficult to pay as much attention as I would like to the action, and also do the best job I can coaching. It tends to be very challenging for me. So it's possible that fold is a mistake, but I don't currently have the correct information to decide whether or not it is a mistake. And so I think I'm going to fold and feel okay about it, realizing that I should probably have better information on that player. Here with my gut shot, I'll check back. Against 4 players, we can be pretty sure that someone has hit the flop. The odds of hitting a pair are about 1 in 5. When you're up against 4 opponents, the odds that someone has hit a pair is going to be pretty high. But I've hit the nuts on the turn now, so I'll raise with it. And we've held through the river, so we'll feel free to put in as much action as they'd like to. Open raise from the small blind. I'll defend here with queen 9. Pretty dry flop. I'm going to peel one off and see what happens on the turn. And he bets again. Very dry turn card. I don't think I can bluff him off too many ace high, so I'll just fold. Especially not better hands, and I'm not going to try and call down there with queen high. Pinjo, he's been a little bit tighter recently, but I still think ace 4 has value against him. Pretty bad flop for us. If they raise, I'll just fold. And we get called in 2 spots. I've improved to a gut shot. Some straight draws actually hit 6-7, but I think they would sometimes raise with 6-7, so we can discount how likely it is for them to have that. Oh, wait a second. I misread the action here. This guy raised the small blind. I thought I was in the small blind. But our ace high is probably good here on the river now. So against his bet, I'm actually going to check call. 5-7 suited against a tight hand range. This hand is very playable. We only have about 30% equity. So I'm going to fold there, but that's close. 8-7 standard raise pre-flop. We hit a gut shot on a 3 flush. We improved to a two-way gut shot, any 5 or 9, so I'll continue betting. And he's called again. On the river, we have 8 high, and he might decide to fold a diamond, so I'm going to bet for as a bluff. You know, thinking that he's going to fold hands like queen high, king high. He may get stubborn and decide to call down with the ace of diamonds, but that's still pretty tough. You know, the board hits a lot of different things, and showing down ace high there to a 3 barrel is going to be hard to justify. Standard 3-bet with king 10 suited. Has the sound gone out again? Oh, I guess I quoted someone. My mistake. So king 10, I'm going to c-bet the flop, and he calls. When he check calls the flop, he can have weak made hands, ace high with flush draws, so it would be pretty expensive for me to bet the turn and the river. So I'm just going to check back and actually give up. This is kind of a exploitative line, but it's something that, you know, I typically see from tight aggressive players. But you know, if it turned out that was a mistake, I'd be happy to reevaluate. I mean, I think the simple fact is that on the turn, we have king high, no hand, and no draw really. So looked at from that perspective, it's easy enough for us to justify giving up. Okay, and could you guys maybe describe the sound problems that you're having? Is it cutting in and out? Um, Sometimes I think that if I talk too long and not give the server a chance to catch up, that that's close. I'm going to fold there. If this were later position, I'd 3-bet. Um, yeah, when I talk too long, I think it builds up a bit of lag. Okay, refreshing the page helps. All right, thanks, Ziz. No, I coach with a PC, but I'm running a lot of stuff today, though, Sven. I've got the this is close as well. I'm going to defend there, but it's quite close. We flop a gut shot. I can rep clubs. He's checked. I'm actually going to barrel the turn in the river. Yeah. Oh, it could be a slow play here now. So I'll just give up. Um, I think that maybe because I'm running so many things today, like I've still got PowerPoint open, I can close that up. Maybe I'm just running too many things on my computer. At roughly 5.5 to 1, we can call pretty much any suited hand there. Pocket twos I'll fold. We flopped a flush draw, which is pretty good. There's a lot of draws on this board though. So I'm going to take a bit of an exception to standard lines and just check call the flop here. I think that if we check raise in this spot, we're going to have so many hands that check raise that it's going to be pretty easy for our opponent to call us down lightly. But now that we've improved to a monster, I'm going to check raise here, and sometimes we'll get him to fold weak pocket pairs and ace highs and stuff like that. And the ace on the river, I'll bet if he has a weak pocket pair, now I think he's very inclined to fold. Something like pocket eights there is going to have a really difficult time showing down. Hey MLK, why fold pocket twos? I thought pocket twos are an easy defense to try and hit a set, right? Or to try and play post flop. So let's talk about that hand. What happened here? I raised pre-flop, he called. Yep. 6-8 suited, I'll defend there. So when he calls this flop, wow, they've seen me fold so often to turn raises, I'm actually going to check there. And the king on the river is kind of blank. He could have a king. 8-6, I'll fold. Let's try and find that hand with twos. Here it is. So when a tight player open raises from the cutoff, he's likely to have a pretty strong hand range. I can see from my statistics that he's open raising from that position roughly 20% of the time, 23%, somewhere in that area. And that's a very strong hand range. It's going to be roughly hands like ace-8 offsuit plus pocket pairs like sixes or better, right? And against that hand range, our equity is pretty weak. Now, in order to try and set mine, we would want stronger equity, probably closer to something like 20%, right? If we were getting 5-1. No, let me explain that differently because I've gotten a little confused. If we want to try and set mine, we need a pretty good price. If we have high implied odds, or if we think that our pocket pair can win a showdown on its own, then we can continue at 3-1. But if you're playing for purely set value, you probably want to have 5-1. So pre-flop, we're only getting about 1-1, a little bit better than 1-1 on our call, and that's not enough to set mine. Also, our equity is not that great. So I've 3-bet this guy again. He's just open raising a lot, and he's been giving up a lot to us, so we've kind of been abusing him a little bit. Now we can essentially value bet ace high. I don't know for sure if he decides to show down with a king high, but once he decides to check call the flop, we can heavily discount the probability that he has a hand like eights or better. And he's left. So actually, I'll sit out here because that table gets pretty dead now that he's gone. And playing on 3 tables is pretty tough for the coaching. So yeah, hopefully that explains why we should fold there with twos. So on the upper left table, I flopped top pair. Some draws came in on the turn. 5-6 got there, also jack-9. When he plays check call, check call, check call, he can have top pair. We saw that he played queen-8 earlier with top pair that way, so he could easily have another top pair. He may even decide that we're value betting with worse hands and pay off later. We see this time he had third pair. And actually, in a way, this confirms my value bet earlier with second pair. And I think I had like a pretty decent kicker or a marginal kicker, something like that. But, it's helpful to recognize, patterns in our opponent's play and try and figure out how lightly we should value bet against them. So I've improved to top pair here on the turn. He's raised us again. We've seen a lot of this. I've got top pair, so I'll just pay off. The river is quite bad, but now, once again, he's less likely to value bet with a lot of hands that, we were losing to. and also some other hands. So let's say he raised the turn with ace eight. He'd probably check back that river. Let's say he raised the turn with, top pair, top kicker, ace jack. He'd probably check back that river. But if he has a draw like a diamond draw, he might decide to barrel. Um, okay, so I raised pre-flop. I'll bet the flop there. Ace 10 I raise, so I'll c-bet. You can probably notice by now that I'm continuation betting a lot. What's this guy's turn aggression? It's not that high. There's some draws. He could easily call with ace high, so I'm going to bet. And actually on the river, I'm going to play check call just because now our kicker is counterfeited. If the river bricked, I would actually think about value betting against other ace highs. But see, we chop. So there's not as many reasons. And I also don't think that he's going to call us with king high often enough to justify betting. There's, well, I was going to say there's maybe a chance that he would check with a better hand than ours, but again, that's pretty unlikely. He's not likely to have ace king, and he's not likely to check back with any full house on that river. So I think he's value betting every better hand than us that's in his hand range. 10-9, we've got a limper in early position. I'll isolate raise here. The big blind's tight. We can get him to fold up a lot of equity. I do not expect to have an equity advantage against his hand range, but when we factor in position and, our hand has some playability and the dead money from the blinds, we have enough reasons to isolate raise our opponent. So I 3-bet ace jack. Here I'll continuation bet. And he's check called. This is the same player who's been check raising me like every time. So this makes it kind of interesting. I mean, I could bet fold 10 high is probably not good, but I kind of feel comfortable just checking back there. He could easily have a weak made hand, especially when he peels this kind of board texture. So we'll just give up. I've been raised on the turn. Oh. One moment, guys. I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but I'm going to reload the coaching browser because it looks like it just crashed for me. Hi, guys. Can everyone hear me okay? I was disconnected out of the coaching player, so I've reloaded it, and hopefully things are okay now. Yeah, I was predicting that if we were going to have some bugs come up, this would definitely be the week where it happens. I am recording for the Poker Strategy Fixed Limit podcast, the very first episode. We're doing kind of a pilot thing this week. So we've got that going on. And I won't be surprised if there's a few things that I need to fine tune in order to get that working better. Okay, Jack 10 offsuit. Most of the time we'll be playing this hand from the big blind. Nine two offsuit, standard fold. And if there are any problems with the sound quality, please let me know. Against a raise and a 3-bet, though, I'm going to fold there. Okay. And it's funny, the upper right table, this is something to pay attention to in your own games. Sometimes you'll be playing up against a weak opponent, but that opponent, for whatever reason, can actually have an edge against you at that point in the match. This George Alex guy, we've seen so far that he is, check raising a lot of turns against me. I haven't been hitting many turns, and as a result, I don't actually know what he's been check raising with. And because of that, he knows that I'm folding to raises, but I don't know what he's raising with. So he actually might have an edge against us here. So, we should probably think about switching this table out. Not to mention, my seat is actually quite bad at this table. I have two players on my right who seem like tight aggressive players, and two players on my left who, well, they're also tight, which is kind of good because I can steal their blinds a lot or isolate, if the situation presents itself. But, I'll be isolating less often given that these players are not limping in weak hands and such. Queen 5, we get free play out of the blinds. Three ways here. I've got a pair and a backdoor flush draw, about 7 outs, but we can actually be ahead, so I'm definitely going to call here now that we've improved. Good turn card. None of the draws have hit. Now it's much less likely that someone has a king. On the other hand, it's much more likely that someone will value bet all better hands. So we have some reasons to be a little bit concerned, even though this card is a bit good for us. And on the river, the 8 actually improves a lot of draws. He's barreled 3 times, so I'm going to fold there with my 5. Pocket 8, standard open raise. 6-4 offsuit with 1 limper, we should fold. I flopped an overpair, which is great for us. And we'll see what George Alex decides to do. So he's raised us immediately. There are a lot of draws on this board. I'm going to 3-bet right away. Some turn cards can kill our action, especially any ace, any king. We don't know for sure. I don't think he's all that likely to check back those hands, but we can actually get some extra action from worse hands by fast playing our overpair. Even if he has a hand like ace deuce, there are some players who might decide to call down. So he's raised us on the turn here. Our hand is still very strong, but we cannot 3-bet for value, in my opinion. Now when he raises the turn, he's representing, maybe 2 pair, maybe trips, right? He might raise the flop with a 3, but he could also have 6-4, and of course he can spew with other hands, so we can justify calling down. Okay, and I'll fake rage quit that table, and we'll pop up a new one. Right. So we've just got about 10 minutes left in the coaching here today. If you guys have any last questions, now is an excellent time to get them in. But of course, if you have very detailed questions, sometimes the feedback forum is a good place to leave them. So we saw this guy call down with second pair earlier. This board has a lot of draws, so I'm not going to try and bluff with my air here. We'll just see what he decides to do. And he bets, and I'll fold. Again, Jack 6 offsuit. This is my standard folding hand against kind of an unknown opponent. And we see here Hold'em Manager 2 acting a bit strange. Looks like my heads-up display is having a problem. I'm going to try and restart it. Interesting. But yeah, as a few general remarks, for people who are just getting used to 6 max, um, you're going to be making more specific adjustments to your position. We talked about that during the presentation that I gave right at the beginning. Even just looking at big blind defense, what we can see is that we're making a lot of adjustments, both depending on where our opponent is racing from or limping from, and depending on the hand range that they're likely to have when they do that action, when they limp in, when they raise. So, probably compared with full ring, you should spend a lot of time looking at specific adjustments to different positions. Full ring is going to be higher variance, or sorry, it'll be smaller variance than 6 max. Full ring, if you play a very tight strategy, your standard deviation um, in big bets per 100 hands can be around, 15 even. It can be quite tight. But at 6 max, it's regularly going to be up above 18. Mine over the, entirety of my hand sample has been about 20, somewhere in that range. So we've been led into on the flop here. I'm just going to raise. There are some turn and river combinations where we can get them to fold some better hands, but we could raise immediately for value and use it as a free card play some of the time. The ace on the turn is kind of good, kind of bad. Sometimes he'll check with a 9, which is good. When he bets, it's a little more likely that he has a 3 now. And we've missed the river, so we'll just fold. Ace 9, once he improves to top pair with the ace, of course he's going to continue betting. Queen 2 suited, standard open raise. I flop second pair, pretty draw heavy board here. This guy can have a lot of hands that want to continue by calling. Any 10, any jack, any king. Pretty bad turn card for us. So I'm actually going to play check call here and evaluate the river. Queen 4, standard fold. When I check the turn, he might decide to bet with obviously any king, any jack, any 10, but he can also bet with flush draws and stuff like that. And of course, top pair. On the river, when he barrels, I'll just fold here. But I would pay off with top pair. Obviously, hands like 2 pair are better. I think we should show down in that spot. But, a full analysis of that hand would require some pretty close looking. Pocket kings will definitely be playing this hand. This player, I'm not actually familiar with what it is that he's open raising. A couple hands ago, we saw him limp in the small blind with ace 9, and then he led top pair on the flop, right? So when he's raising here, there's a pretty good chance that he has hands that are better than ace 9. And we don't know how much better. But of course, he can have different things as well. So he's led into us on the flop. This could be a draw, a queen, small pocket pairs, lots of stuff. I'm going to take the standard line here of call flop raise turn. And he calls. The river, if he has ace queen, it's a tough beat. Not much we can do about that. I'll just pay off. 5-7 offsuit, standard fold there. 6-3 standard fold, and I'll just take a quick note that he open raised from middle position with ace 8 suited, and queen 4-5 with 2 clubs. He let out and bet called the turn with I think he had a gut shot. Yeah, it was a 6. A lot of times when a player is both donk betting and playing check call, this gives us a lot of information because they do not tend to do, those things with a balanced hand range. So, you know, if they're leading out of the flop, it usually means one thing, and if they're checking the flop, it usually means kind of another. Ace-8 here, I'll open raise. It's close though. This guy behind me is very tight, so I think he's going to fold pretty often. And he 3-bets, which of course isn't good for us. Against the 4-bet, Ace-8 plays very poorly, so I'm going to actually fold to the 4-bet. We are getting 5-1, but our hand has very low playability against 3-bet and 4-bet hand ranges. Five three standard fold there. You know, over the last few months, when I've been doing coachings, one thing I notice a lot is that when I play my own sessions, what happens is I tend to focus a lot more on what it is the players are doing, but I find that to be very difficult. And I wonder what it is I could do about that. If you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Obviously, I try to cover a lot of the action. Some of it you guys can see for yourself, so it's pretty obvious. So this guy's checked back the flop. We've seen him continuation betting like 100% of the time, and we know that he's aggressive. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's a decent chance that he's kind of slow playing sometimes. And obviously we can't show down our king there on the river, but he wasn't. So we can take a note of that. Very useful information. Ace queen here. This guy opened 4-bet with trash earlier. So that's going to help us a lot. We get more value from his hand range, given that he's raising with some trash hands. And that gives me, you know, more reasons to 4-bet pre-flop. Against the 3-better, he can have some, you know, a pretty decent range of hands. We can see that he's open raising. Maybe 30%. Our hand range on him is small, so we don't really know for sure. But even if he's relatively tight, because this player is so loose, it's going to give us a lot of reasons to raise. So what happened here? Wow, there's 8 small bets in. So what happened? I raised and he 3-bet. I think that's what happened. So I've basically bricked the flop. I've got a gut shot, but we have to discount it pretty heavily. I can represent diamonds. I'm going to try a loose bluff here. It's close because I don't know for sure how often this player is going to fold. It's also possible that I've misread the pot size on the flop there, and I've just done something very fancy. Oh, he did 3-bet. Okay, okay. So I didn't play that like a donk. Eat a cheeseburger. Now, hey Avatar, why would I want to eat a cheeseburger? I have no idea what you're talking about. Queen 4 offsuit, standard fold. You asked what I should do a little earlier, and I answered. Well, I can guarantee you one thing. If I'm asking questions in the coaching, it's usually going to be poker related stuff. So we're actually all out of time for today. I'm going to sit out the next round of blinds. But thanks for the questions. I'd like to apologize for the quality of the sound this week. That is something I'll try to figure out for next week. And I hope you guys really enjoyed you know, some of those questions that I answered from last week, looking at big blind defense. Actually, there is one last thing that we could bring up before I wrap things up, because it's kind of interesting and relates really specifically to last week. Now, in one of Boomer's videos, and the link was brought up last week, he talks about defending your big blind, you know, roughly 80% of the time. And he said basically that when we choose to raise less often, wow, can I bet call and then call down here? I'm going to check back and call, but it's close because I think I can get value. He can easily have like Queen Jack and stuff like that, so I'll pay off here. Okay, so let me bring up Equilab again. And let's look at a solid small blind open raising range. Obviously, there's lots of ways we could figure this out. Here's a 63% hand range, which I think is fairly appropriate to raise from the small blind. There's a few changes that I'd probably make here. 6-4 suited, we can often raise. Yeah, so something like that. Very loose aggressive. I wouldn't even recommend that you guys use this hand range for the micro stakes because of the rake and things like that. Now, let's just go ahead and we'll use that 35% equity that we were talking about earlier, right? When we were talking about, how to adjust against a small blind raise. So we calculate this hand range, and what we're going to see is that it's very wide, roughly 75%. Actually, it's 83%. Now, there are hands we could trim out, right? Weak jack highs that don't have good playability, but this is essentially where that comes from, right? If we take a very loose, aggressive open raising range and calculate 35% equity against it, then, we come up with a very wide range of hands that should defend against that opponent. However, because of the rake, we need to make additional adjustments, which we talked about. And also, because players are not racing that often, we make even further adjustments. We've got this one tag who's open raising 60%, but if we look around the table at other players, they're going to be raising different amounts. And it can vary quite a lot. So, yeah, something definitely for you guys to spend more time on when the video goes up. Definitely feel free to check it out. And if you have any questions at that point, I'll be happy to answer them. So this has been That's My Name for Poker Strategy. Have a great week, guys.